Hello once again. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. And also, yes, of course, good evening. It's great to see all of you here once again. It's a privilege to have you guys here. Today is going to be another interesting section, and we are at the week 8 of the boot camp. Can you believe it? Um, it has actually been like quite the experience. Somebody said, I'm looking at the comments, AWS is not for the weak, definitely. Cloud as a whole is not for the weak, but it has been an interesting journey so far. And we as well have a instructor on the call. So I'll cover a few bits and pieces. Uh, my regards, Isaac, too, as well. I'll cover a few bits and pieces and then we get the ball rolling. Okay. So yes, we've gone through quite the journey. Week 1 up to now, week 8, and we've covered quite a couple of interesting topics, as you would see in our curriculum. And also, as aligned with our curriculum, we are. This is July 26th. So yes, as promised, week 8, we are covering S3 buckets and CloudFront. It's quite interesting because we did deploy applications, we did website right on S3 on actually on what's it ECS, and when we deploy those websites on ECS, it was more like a dynamic site, but this time around we are deploying static websites, and we have someone powerful on the call to take us through that journey. So yes, and also it's very important that we also stick up to week 9, because week 9 is also even going to be more interesting, because we would cover a question some of you have been asking about: how do we enable HTTPS for our website? Either it be what you did with ECS, CloudFront, or also what you did with you're going to do with load balancers, or what you have, you'll be able to cover all of that here as well. Okay, all right, so let's get it in. All right, so important part to mention would be that we are very close to the end of this program, and as such, what we've noticed in the past is that when it's now time for submission of tax, you would see people pleading for extension. You would see people pleading for, oh, I had one inconvenience or the other, and because of that, I was not able to follow through. I'm lacking behind. I'm also, because of that, not able to complete my tax. In as much as we understand that everybody's circumstance can be different, it's important that we do stick to time. So we're going to have a very short window where we are going to be receiving tax submissions. That's also part of the reasons why we kept submissions to the very last stage. There's only going to be a very small window for submissions. And we've also mentioned it before. Only people part of the boot camp will be able to submit their tax, so that we can track that, assess those tax, and then take them to the next phase of the program. I'm much aware that most of these sections, because people could not find it, people could not access it, we made the decision to make these sections public. So a lot of people will be able to access this section, even people not in the bootcamp. Yes, that's fine. But now, proceeding to the next level, we need to be a bit more granular, right? We need to just work with few persons, all right, so that we can manage that capacity and deliver a very excellent experience for them. Okay, so that's really all I need to say for now. Instructions will be shared in due time. I guess by week 10, you should be able to have instructions on how to go about submitting your tax. Yes, by the end of the week 10 section. So let's dive right in. We have, as I said, someone powerful in our midst. William. William is an experienced tech consultant. Is the boss of consultants. Is the one that you call in when there's trouble, or there's one hack or breach with your infrastructure, it's your cloud environment. Is the one that gets things done. He also has a very strong background in cloud architecture, DevSecOps, and infrastructure security. He advises organizations across industries on designing and implementing secure, scalable cloud environments using AWS and GCP. He is GIC certified, holds 4 AWS certifications, and also GCP certified. Ah, William would have to cut so for us. With a passion for cloud education and security best practices, he helps teams adopt cloud technologies confidently and securely. Without taking much of our time, I would like to hand over to William to take us through what do we need to do to deploy a static website on S3 buckets and also serve that website through CloudFront. Thank you so much, William. It's a privilege.
All right, thank you very much, Okun. Good day, everyone. Okun has introduced me as though I'm some, but that's all right. Um, so just get right into it. Okay, so we'll be looking at S3, AWS S3, and we'll look at CloudFront, and we'll look at how we can work together with S3 and CloudFront to deploy a static site. Now, AWS S3, um, we know AWS is Amazon Web Services, and S3 is Simple Storage Service. It's a highly scalable, flexible, and accessible service, right, that stores objects within buckets. Now, you may already be wondering, objects, buckets. I thought it's files we actually store, right? So with AWS S3 is not a file system like, the typical file system you have on your Windows system or Mac. So AWS is just a bucket. The simplest way I can think of it is, think of a basket of tomato, right? You just have a basket and it contains lots of tomatoes. That's literally what S3 is. So you just have a bucket and it contains lots of objects. Now these objects could be files. This object could be any type of file, executable PDF, Word files, just about anything. I don't think there's anything that AWS bucket, S3 bucket would not accept. So just about anything could be stored in AWS S3 buckets. Now, the typical use case for AWS S3 buckets, I think very important, is backup and restore. So if you work in an IT environment, you need to back up lots of data, right? Some of us know OneDrive, Dropbox, right? You need to back up lots and lots of data, gigabytes, terabytes. That's where AWS S3 shows its strengths, right? Use it for archiving, use it to create, a lot of third parties use it to also create data lakes. So if you're into data science and data analysis, right, S3 buckets also excels, right, in that area. So S3 buckets are very performant. They can store up to 100 objects at a time, right? And you can have as many buckets in an AWS account as as possible. So let's look at some of the features of S3 buckets. There are lots actually, but these are some of the key ones. We have bucket versioning. So typically, when you upload an object to AWS S3 bucket, that object may be a PDF file, .pdf, maybe .jpeg, it may be an executable file, maybe a Word file. When you upload it for the first time, a version 1 of that object is created. If you upload that same document again, AWS will create a version 2 of that document. So the version 1 will exist and the version 2 will exist. If you upload a third one, it will create a version 3. So it's sort of like version management. So what that means is that if you upload the same document 5 times, you can go back to the first or second version or the earlier versions and retrieve it. So which is if you dealt with GitHub or GitLab, you can see it has that version management capability, right? Which is something that's built into S3. So that's bucket versioning. Now we also have event notification. Now Amazon S3 is just one of many Amazon services, right? So you could integrate your S3 bucket with other services. I'm sure we've looked at EC2 or ECS, right? You could say, when I upload a file to S3, trigger an EC2 instance to carry out a particular action, right? Or when a user downloads a file from S3, trigger a Lambda function to do a specific task. So you can do those sorts of integrations to with S3 using the event notification feature. Now we also have the object lock feature. The object lock feature is very interesting because if you're coming from a law background or forensic background, sometimes you need to store evidence and you do not want that evidence to be tampered with. So typically we call it write once, read many, meaning that this file can be modified only once or can be written to only once. And once it's written to, you can never ever modify that information again. So that's where the AWS object locks come in. So you can upload an object, maybe your PDF file or your forensic evidence or your law, your case from your law firm or whatever, and then you can lock it. So once that's done, nobody can access or even modify that data. We also have CloudTrail login. I'm sure we've seen CloudTrail, which is AWS feature for logging. You can also integrate that with your S3 whenever APIs are called. You can also log that and of course use that for whatever purpose. Then one of the most important security feature is encryption. So by default, S3 objects are encrypted, right? So once you upload a PDF, a file, an object, it's encrypted by default, right? However, there are also other options in terms of the encryption features you could select, but by default, there's an encryption. So this server-side encryption just refers to the fact that it is AWS that performs the encryption by default. You don't need to do anything, just upload, and at the server end, AWS encrypts it. Then, of course, we have static web hosting, which is what we'll be looking at today, where you can host static site directly from an S3 bucket. We also have bucket policies, which we use to define permissions for your buckets, right? Who can access these buckets? An AWS account can have, sorry, an AWS yes account can have multiple users, right? You can decide that, oh, you want only user ABC to access the buckets. In order to do that, you just create a bucket policy, and that helps you do that. You can also restrict services. So you can say, oh, I want only my ECS service, or I want only my CloudFront service to access my buckets. You use bucket policy to achieve that. Also, if your bucket, for example, is public and you want users to only be able to download, you don't want them to be able to upload, you don't want them to be able to modify, just download. You also use bucket policy, which we would see later on when we get to the demo session. So basically, bucket policy just is a security feature that restricts permissions to your bucket. Then lastly, we have S3 bucket access, right? So this says prevent public access to buckets, right? So S3 has an access control list. It's more of an advanced feature which you can use to manage access to your bucket. So let's say you're sharing your buckets with another AWS account. So I don't know if most of you know this, but if you have an AWS account like I do, and let's say Okun has an AWS account, I can share my S3 service, or my S3 bucket rather, with Okun, right? So you have something called account to account integration in AWS, where two accounts can share services. So in order to manage that permission associated with account to account sharing, we use S3 bucket access control list. So there are much more other features, but those are quite advanced. So these are just the key feature that we'll address here. So someone is asking the difference between S3 and RDS, right? So RDS is a database, right? So it's a relational database system, right? Relational database comes with, first of all, let me break it down. Relational database system typically comes with its own software, needs a separate operating system to run on. Um, um, yeah, it uses tables and schemas. It's a whole different world which you use to store data. Now in S3, S3 is object oriented. You remember how the example I gave before. You have a basket and you just pour tomato into the basket. Just keep pouring tomato. That's literally what S3 is. You have a bucket called S3 bucket, and you just keep adding objects into it, right? That's just what it is. The S3 itself doesn't really even know what objects are. It just uses an identifier to identify each of them. It doesn't interact with them in any way. Unlike a database, with the database can interact with data. You can do things like indexing, sorting, and all those things. S3 doesn't do any of that, right? It's just an object storage. Um, Someone is also asking, can I host multiple static sites in one bucket using folder based routing? Right. So one of the thing that makes AWS a preferred cloud provider is the fact that they offer lots of flexibility. Right. Now I can't tell you off the chart whether this is possible, but I can tell you that using AWS services like CloudFront functions, Lambda at the edge, you can definitely achieve this. I don't know if directly you can achieve this like as a feature, but using a combination of AWS services, right, it's possible to achieve that. Now, in AWS S3, we do not have folders similar to what we have in our typical file system, right? We don't have folders, right? So when you have a bucket on the AWS, and when you have a bucket, all the objects are just dumped into that bucket. So what AWS has done is, in order to make management easier, AWS has added a logical, sort of like a logical folder systems where you objects are organized based on folders, right? But in the real sense, those folders don't actually exist. And you see that when you actually start doing some integrations, you realize that there are actually no folders. Everything just has a name. So for example, if a content like index.html is inside a logical folder called blog, that index.html, the full name of that object would be blog slash index.html. That is the name of the object. So you wouldn't say that the object exists inside the folder. No. To S3, the full name is blog slash index.html. So that way, AWS is able to understand logical systems. Okay. So someone say, can you say S3 on a normal level is like a flash that stores some objects, but with a limit on storage space? No, you can't say that. So object storage system is very much different from file storage system. There's a clear distinction. In your Windows environment, your operating system environment, you have file storage systems. But with AWS, what we have is object storage, or sometimes they call it blob storage. There are two different technologies, right? Okay. Let's see. Why is it important to enable static websites hosting on an S3 bucket before using CloudFront? It's important because you know would I say it's important? Now, there are a number of ways to achieve the same thing on AWS, right? So it's very much possible to just put content in your S3 buckets and connect them to your CloudFront without enabling static web hosting. It's very much possible and it's going to work. I have a blog and that's exactly how I deployed it. Right, it's very much possible. But AWS came up with this separate feature called static web hosting, right? That I think it just makes setting CloudFront much more easier, right? Um, if you set up S3 web hosting without CloudFront, you're not going to have SSL, you're not going to have HTTPS, right? So it's when you now connect to the CloudFront that you have HTTPS. So one, it's very much possible not to use the static website hosting, and you use just CloudFront and S3 bucket and you're fine. Two, you can still use your static web hosting together with CloudFront and you'll still be fine. So I don't know if that answers your question, Adedayo. I just wish maybe we can run a demo so that we can see. Um, but AWS advises that you use the enable the static web hosting feature, which we'll look at later on. But it's very much possible not to enable that, and you still have your static sites working. Because remember, this feature just came out, I think, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Prior to that, we didn't have that. When I deployed my own blog, I didn't have that feature, so you could just deploy directly. Storage on an operating system is different from S3. Yes, on operating system we use file system storage, right? That's the technology. So it's a difference in technology, not just semantics. It's a difference in technology. Windows has NTFS. There are different file storage systems out there, right? File storage system typically need an operating system that they run on and whatnot. With AWS, the technology is called object storage system. So, okay, I think let's move on. A lot of you just want to see the demo, so we'll get to that now. So let's talk about CloudFront before we go to the demo. So CloudFront is used for content delivery, right? So if you've ever used Netflix, I don't know if you've wondered how is Netflix able to load videos very quickly, right? Some of these videos are very large. How are they able to load it very quickly? Gigabytes of data, because if you attempt downloading the same videos online, it takes forever. However, if you just open Netflix or YouTube, this content loads very fast. The answer to that is cloud delivery networks, right? So basically, these cloud providers have, or AWS in this case, have data centers around the world, right? And so using those data centers, they're able to serve you content from the closest data center to you. So that way it cut down latency so you can access contents faster on the web. So it says here when a user visits a site, CloudFront delivers the content from the nearest location to you. Sorry, from the nearest location to you. Right. So if you're in Nigeria, I think they have a site in Nigeria and in South Africa. So those are the data centers that should be serving you. However, you're in the US, there are data centers in the US that will be serving you. So that way, you're able to get content much faster. So this is typically used, as I said earlier, for video streaming. Okay, streaming and on-demand video. It's also used in large organizations to distribute patches and updates. And even for simple websites like your blog, you can use it to cache static content of your blog. That's your HTML and CSS. So that every time a user requests for content, it doesn't go to the server to get this content. It can simply serve you directly from CloudFront. We are actually going to look at that when we see the demo. So, okay, someone say, I guess there's only one in Africa and it's located in South Africa. Yes, they actually have a local site. AWS has a local site in Lagos here, right? And they have an availability zone in South Africa. Someone is asking, is it possible to use static site functionality with other S3 compatible storage like Minio? Okay, I don't know what Minio is, so I can't say yes or no. But what I can say is that um, S3 technology is sort of like proprietary to AWS. So it's not like your file system that is standardized. Azure has a similar service called Azure Blob, and it's also proprietary to Azure. GCP also has a similar service. So it's not like a standardized service to say that, oh, maybe they are interoperable. But the good thing is that you can always download content from AWS and move those contents to Azure. It doesn't make any difference, right? But about compatibility with Minio, I haven't used Minio, so I don't know what exactly that works. Okay, so we have a data here. How does invalidation work in CloudFront and when should they be used? Right. So we talked about let me see. So CloudFront is, as I said earlier, it's a content delivery network. It basically works by caching static content, right? Static content can be video, static content can be HTML, right? So it caches it so that whenever a user requests for it, it just serves it directly. Now you may wonder, oh, is that not how it's supposed to work? Well, think about this. Imagine you have a server, an EC2 server on AWS, right? Your website, let's say WordPress, for example. Every time a user clicks on your site, it makes a request to your EC2 server. Every single time, it makes a request to your EC2 server, and your EC2 server responds, right? Now, if you put the cloud front in front of that your EC2 server, what will happen is that the content of your website that does not change frequently, for example, the color, the style, all those things doesn't change. It's just the content that changes. So all those static parts of your website will be cached in CloudFront. So when somebody requests your sites, those static content, okay, let me explain it this way. Have you ever loaded Facebook or any site and nearly you load it, it shows you like a framework, if a sorry, not a framework, it's usually called a wireframe. So it just shows you this frame and tells you it's loading, but it doesn't show any content, it just shows frame, right? So typically what happens is that your browser has downloaded the static content of that site, the color, the HTML, the CSS, that's downloaded everything. However, the dynamic content is still loading from the server. So that's one of the benefits of caching. So every time a user makes a request, the request does not need to go to the server, right? If that request is static, it will be in the CloudFront and you can just get done quickly. So of course, the next question would be, so what if I change the content on my server? When a user makes a request, would it also serve the old content that was cached on CloudFront? Well, that's where caching validation comes in. So when you update your server, when you change certain static content on your server, you can actually invalidate the already existing content on CloudFront, right? So you invalidate it such that the next time a user makes a request, CloudFront does not have anything to serve the user. So CloudFront will now make the request to your server and download, or is it download or get that information, which it can now cache. So that's the whole point of caching validation, right? Content on my website has changed or my application has changed, right? CloudFront, don't save this content, remove it from your memory, right? So the next time a user asks, download it from, the server and update. So that's how cloud invalidation works. Okay, so how do you handle path-based routing for multiple static sites within a single CloudFront distribution? Okay, so CloudFront has, we are going to look at that. I'll get a snip of that when we open CloudFront. So CloudFront has something called origin. So the origin on CloudFront is what tells you the source. So for example, your origin could be an EC2 server, your origin could be an ECS, your origin could be S3 buckets, your origin could be anything, right? So if you have multiple static sites, right, that you want to serve via CloudFront, you can just specify the origin, right, in the CloudFront distribution. So that should help you with that. Is the invalidation time based or has to be manually triggered? So I think when talking about AWS, one thing we should understand is that AWS has APIs, right? As much as all our demonstration is going to be via the graphical based interface, that is the web browser, AWS has APIs. Every single thing we are going to do in our demo can be done via APIs, right? So what that means is that via your terminal, you could use maybe AWS SDK and you could call the services, right? So imagine I actually have a server. I can write a short script, right? Just a small piece of code, right? And tell AWS that, oh, I've updated my web content, invalidate the cache, right? It's very much possible, especially with things like GitHub Actions. You can do that in your CI/CD pipeline, actually, right? So that can be done there. It's also still possible to do it manually, but I don't see why anyone would want to do it manually. It's actually still possible. I will show you that when we get to CloudFront. But it can be done manually. It can be done by calling AWS APIs. Everything on AWS can be achieved via the APIs or via logging into the browser and clicking on the particular service you want to use. Yes, Jennifer, this is a mixed class. Different people have different level of understanding. So, yeah. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so I've uploaded some file content for those of us who I think we also posted this in the chat earlier on, right? So you can visit this website. This is my GitHub website. You can download from there. It's going to be a zip folder, so you can unzip it, or you could use this S3 website I hosted, and you could also download the contents from there. So either one that works for you. So we'll go straight up into the demo. I just want to know before we go to demo, is there anybody that's following that will be following me while I'm doing this demo? Is there anyone that will be following me so that I can get feedback? Is there anybody on their system now that will, so that we can walk through the demo together? You can indicate in the chats. Is there anyone? Okay, sure, someone is. Okay, so just let me know if I'm moving too fast or if you have a question. Okay, so this is what the architecture looks like, right? It's a very simple architecture, right? So we have our CloudFront and our S3 buckets or our S3 service, right? And then we have our S3 bucket. So when a user makes a GET request to the browser, right? Or when a user attempts to access our website, the browser is going to make that request over the internet to CloudFront. CloudFront is going to reach out to S3. S3 will get the content from the buckets, and then you should be able to see that in the browser. So at a high level, this is what we are trying to achieve, right? Okay. All right, so go to your S3, your AWS account, log into your AWS account, and in the search bar, type S3. So let's just open our S3 buckets. So for this lab, we'll be using the first download, right? So we'll be using the first download for this demonstration. Okay, so we are going to create a new bucket now. Now, buckets in AWS have to have a unique name, right? So you can't use, if I use something like cloud, for example, now, and I try to save you, so it gives me an error. It will tell me buckets with the same name already exist. So on AWS, we try to use a unique name for every bucket, right? That is because every bucket in AWS is unique, right? So the buckets are not scoped to just your account, it's scoped globally. So for this, let me name it CSN static website hosting. So for those following, CSN dash static web dash static dash website dash hosting. AWS also has certain restrictions on how you name your buckets. So if you can read below here, certain characters are not allowed and whatnot. So this will be the name of our bucket. We are going to select general purpose buckets, which is already selected, right? AWS has different bucket types. However, for this, we'll just be using the default bucket type, which is the standard general purpose bucket. We've entered our bucket name. Under object ownership, we are going to you leave the default selected. ACLs are disabled. Under block public access settings for our buckets, we are going to leave it block all public access. Under bucket versioning, we are going to disable, leave it as a default. It's not very important for our use case now. And for encryption, we are also going to leave the default, right, which is server-side encryption. Remember, I told you that by default, AWS S3 encrypts your object. So let's just leave it as the default. For the bucket key, let's leave it as the default. And let's create our buckets. Okay, so we have created our bucket now. CSN static website hosting. So let's click on the buckets, and our bucket has no object inside of it. All right. So let's go to the link that was posted. I'll just copy it from the chat. So I'll open a new tab over here. Okay. So I'll open a new tab and paste the link. All right. So we are going to download this index file. This is what we'll use for. So I'll click on it. It opens Windows pop-up, and I'm able to download it. Okay, so now I've downloaded it. I go back to my objects and I upload it. So I click add file. Okay, so I've added the file, and with this, I'll click on upload. Okay, upload succeeded. So just a reminder that both links are also available on Discord, so you can also access it from Discord too. Okay, so can we move forward? Those that are following me, can we move forward? Okay, I can't see a response. Okay, yes, we can. Okay, so close. So now we have one object um, in our bucket. So now we are going to configure our S3 buckets for S3 for web hosting, right? So the first thing I would do, I'll go to properties, and I'll scroll down to the last section of properties. We have static web hosting. So I'm going to click edit, and I'm going to enable. So leave all the default settings as it is. Hosting type default. Index documents, specify the home or default page. So in our case, the index is index.html. That's our index document. So with this, we save changes. So we've enabled static web hosting, and you'll see that a link has been generated. Something you'll notice about this link is that the link is not secure. It doesn't have an S, right? Now let's click the link. Let's see what happens. Let's just experiment. So if we click the link, which we just created, it says, okay, it's giving us a warning is that it's not secure. If we click on continue, it gives us a 403 forbidden, access denied, right? So if you remember earlier, we blocked all public access to this bucket. That is the reason why we are getting this error, right? All public access has been blocked. So let's go and change that bucket policy. So we go to permissions next, and we have here block public access. We have to change this. So we click on edit, and we disable this, and we save. Save by typing the word confirm, and we've saved it. So with this, we've disabled this block public access, right? So with this, we should have access to our website. Let's load it again. Oops, still access denied. So AWS has built in a feature because public access to S3 buckets on AWS became a very big issue. As a matter of fact, it's still a very big issue today, where developers configure S3 buckets and just disable this feature. And by disabling this feature, you're giving access to the whole of your bucket. So if there's just one object, for example, that you're supposed to give access to, doesn't matter here. You have given access to your whole bucket, right? Which is a very dangerous setting. So AWS has made it such that by disabling this feature, you still need to specifically add a permission or a policy before you're able to enable public access. So to do that, we'll come back to our file download site. We'll click on number 4, download S3 bucket policy. So we'll download that policy. It's a text file, so you can just copy the content of the text file. Once you copy it, you come back to this policy, you click on edit, and you paste the policy here. Right. Now, the policy comes with some default names like this. So this is saying your bucket name. So what that means is that you have to replace this with the name of your bucket, right? So if you look just above, you see that the name of your bucket is there already. Your bucket ARON, ARON, that's the name of your bucket. That's AWS resource number. So we copy that ARON and we replace this, Control V. Okay, just be careful here. This is asking for your bucket's name. So it's just the bucket name you need, which is the name we created. So it's just the bucket name you need. So just copy CSN static website hosting. Because if you notice, the full ARN is here already. So you don't need to copy it twice. Okay, so let's go through this policy. Let's just have a feel of what this policy does. So this policy has a name. SID means name or refers to the name. It says public read or get objects, right? The effect of the policy is allow. The principal is a wildcard. A wildcard means any. It doesn't specify a particular principal, so anybody. The action is S3 get objects, right? Get object is similar to or is anonym is what is the word? Is synonymous to read only, right? So then we have the resource. So what this policy does is it allows any principal to read this resource. Basically, it allows any principal to read or to get this resource. Basically, allow any principal gets this resource, or allow any principal gets the objects in this bucket. So that's just one way to interpret it. So with this, we are going to save. So as much as we have blocked all public access, we have used a policy to restrict that public access to a specific action, which is just get only, right? So what that means is that the principal will not be able to upload to my container. They won't be able to modify. They won't be able to delete. All they will be able to do is just get, all right? So from a security point of view, that's a big deal. Okay, so now we've done this. Um, let's see again whether we are able to access it. Wow, we're able to access it, right? So our index.html file has loaded correctly as expected. So you may be wondering, this looks like the download site. Exactly, it is actually the download site that is contained in the index.html, right? So we have been able to host a static site on AWS S3. But we still have a problem. The problem is that this site is not secure. We don't have SSL, no HTTPS on this site. Now, what's the importance of HTTPS? HTTPS is end-to-end encryption. Another way to say it is that this site is communicating to CloudFront. Between my browser and CloudFront, um, every communication that goes between my browser and CloudFront is in clear text or plain text. So when you don't have HTTPS, any interaction between your web browser and CloudFront or EC2 or ECS, regardless of whatever you're using, will be done in clear text. Um, to just drill that down to make you understand, let me just break it down. What that means is that your ISP, Airtel, can actually see your traffic. if that makes sense. It means anybody between your browser and AWS CloudFront can view your traffic. That's what it simply means if you don't have HTTPS, right? So that's very bad. You can imagine if this site is actually, let's say, it's a shopping site, for example. What that means is that if you put in your card details, if you put in your personal information, anybody between your browser or any system between your browser and CloudFront can view um, whatever you're sending, right? Which is very terrible. So, okay, someone says man in the middle, right? That's actually what it's called, the technical name. So, in order to secure our site and also to add caching to our sites, we need CloudFront. So let's go ahead and set up CloudFront now. So go back to um, AWS in the search bar, type CloudFront. Okay. So does anyone have a question? Do we have questions before we move forward? At least we are done with one part of it. Are there any questions from what we've done so far? Oops, I think there's an issue here. So I'm looking at the chat. Any questions? Okay, can CloudFront block bots or restrict access by country or IP? Yes. So CloudFront has lots of features. Like I said, services are packed with tons and tons of features, and they're always adding new features, right? So it can do that. I think it's called geo restriction. So you could actually restrict certain geographies or countries or whatnot, right? So you can do that with CloudFront. The next question here is, if I wanted to localize my static website for multiple languages, would I set up separate buckets or use subfolders with CloudFront behaviors? Okay. For multiple languages, um, yeah. So you can use CloudFront functions, I think, like you said. So CloudFront has this feature called CloudFront functions, and basically what CloudFront function does is that CloudFront function sits between CloudFront and S3. So you make a request, your request goes to CloudFront. CloudFront makes that request to S3. In between, you can use CloudFront functions to manipulate that request, right? A user makes a request to CloudFront. CloudFront is about to send that request to S3. You have a CloudFront function that just picks that request, right? And it can do so many things with it. You can call a Lambda function. You can redirect it to a different bucket. There are just a lot of things you could do with it. So yeah, we can actually use that to achieve translation, or you can just put Google Translate on your site, and I think that would also work too. Okay, how can we monitor and analyze performance of a static site using S3 and CloudFront? Okay, the static site uses S3 and CloudFront. Okay, when we say monitoring, what kind of monitoring? So S3 integrates with all, I think virtually all AWS services, right? So you have your CloudTrail, um, you also have your cloud logs. So if it's security monitoring, I think you can achieve that that way. You can always pipe logs from that. CloudFront also has the ability to also send logs to different login services, right? So you could actually use take advantage of that to forward logs and filter the logs depending on what you're looking out for. So do we need TypeScript or Python or Go language during deployment? Do we need TypeScript or Python or Go language during deployments? Um, so when it comes to a website, let's explain that. A website is basically three technologies. You have HTML, you have CSS, and you have JavaScript. These three things make a website, right? So any other language you use like TypeScript can always be converted back to JavaScript. So what we have so far in our demo is basically HTML and CSS. There are no JavaScript, but you can add JavaScript if you want. So JavaScript just gives you more functionality on the website, right? So if you've ever visited the website and maybe you see some cute things spinning or moving around, right, it probably has JavaScript. So JavaScript gives life and form to your website. So you don't necessarily need TypeScript. Do you need Python or Go? It's a static site, right? So there's a difference between static websites and dynamic websites, right? So with a static site, typically the contents are static, like what we've deployed, right? The content are static, they don't change in real time, right? So if you have to change the contents, you have to re-upload all your files again. But with dynamic changes in real time. You're on Facebook, you add a comment, your friend on the other side of the world can see your comments in real time, right? So that's a dynamic website. So a dynamic website typically will be running or would need a server, right? Because every request you make has to be processed by the server. On the other hand, for static sites, you don't necessarily need a server. You can host it on a server, that's true to work, but you don't necessarily need that because it's static. It's just a bunch of files that are presented to the browser. So can I connect this with CI/CD? Yes, you can use CI/CD pipelines to do all sorts of deployment. I think I have my personal website and I use GitLab, right? So whenever I make changes, I just push it to GitLab, and GitLab is able to invalidate, and GitLab is able to push to S3 buckets. Then from S3 buckets, I trigger an event notification that invalidates the existing content. And so the next time a user asks for my content, the fresh content is presented. So but that's a little bit advanced and complex for this class. I don't know. But it's very much possible. Lots of integrations are possible with S3 buckets. Remember that S3 bucket was one of the first services that AWS actually released, right? And AWS has been around for how long? 2007 or so, almost 10, 15 years. So you can imagine how mature the solution is. Just about anything you can think about can be done in terms of integrations, can be achieved with S3 buckets. Can we use access server login? Yes, you can definitely use access. You can use server access login on S3. You can definitely use that. So like I said, for it depends on what you are logging for. So if you're logging from a security point of view, or if you're logging from an API point of view, or if you're logging from user request point of view, let's say. So API point of view is when someone is interacting with the bucket you have created on those sort of things, get requests and whatnot. So there are different things that can be achieved when it comes to logging, but definitely you can definitely use that to do that. Here we uploaded the file manually. Can you show us an example where we use GitHub Actions instead? So we try to keep this demonstration as simple as possible to carry everyone along, right? That is very much possible, but it's not covered here right now. that will require us to have a GitHub and set up the pipeline, but that's very much possible. What are the limitations of hosting on a static site on S3? Well, for one, S3 is not a web server, right? It's static. So what that means is that typical features that a web server provides, you don't have them with S3. Setting up S3 might seem easy, but when your site starts scaling and you start having, maybe you want to integrate card payments, you want to do things, it can get really, really complex. So in such situation, you're better off just using a typical server for your application. But for simple things like a blog, just put things out there. Okay, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm working on, so on and so forth. So for that, you don't necessarily need a server per se. So static sites will serve you better. So as a general rule of thumb, if you're just interested in the public reading your content, it's a static site you need. If it's just you're interested in people reading your content, you need a static site, right? But if you're interested in anything outside of that, that has to do with payments, that has to do with dynamic content uploads, that has to do with these other things, typically, it's not that it's not possible, but typically you will need a server to just make life easier for you. Of course, S3 out of the book, S3 doesn't offer SSL TLS2. You need CloudFront to give you that too. On a server too, out of the box, a server doesn't give you SSL TLS. You also need to configure it. But yeah, that's just those are some of the major difference. S3 is for static. You have static, fine. Once it becomes dynamic, you switch over to your typical server. All right, so I think we can continue with the demo. Okay, so we go to CloudFront, just for those of us who might be. So you type CloudFront in the sidebar and you open it. So the first thing we will do is we'll create a distribution. A CloudFront distribution is just a collection of settings or configurations on CloudFront that helps us to publish our site. So we'll click create distribution. Let's just name it CSN static web hosting. Right, that's the distribution name. Give it. Description is optional. Here we have a single website. You can see we also have the option of multi-tenant architecture where we have multiple domains. That's a bit advanced again, but let's stick to our single website or web app. We have a custom domain. For this demonstration, we are not using a custom domain. So let's assume your name is Bolaji Adetokunbo and you want your site to be bolajiadetokunbo.com, right? So you come here, you type your bolajiadetokunbo.com. That will become your domain. So, but for this demonstration, we are not using that. So we put our name, you select a single web app, and then we click next. So I talked about CloudFront's origin. So we can see here we have 6 origins. We have S3 bucket, we have load balancer, we have API gateway, we have VPC origin, and we have others, right? So in our own case, we are looking at Amazon S3. That's where our objects is located. So we select this and we scroll down, and it's asking us to select our S3. So let's browse. This is our S3, CSN new training. So we click on it. Sorry, this is our S3. It's a CSN static website hosting, right? Which is the one we created. So we click on CSN static website hosting and we choose. Oh, it has prompted us. It says this S3 bucket has static web hosting enabled. If you plan to use this distribution as a website, we recommend using S3 website endpoint rather than the bucket endpoint. Okay, so the difference between S3 website endpoint and this is in the naming, right? So just take note of this. Once I click here, this is going to change. So you can see it's added this. So this is just the difference, right? So this specifies that we are using S3 website endpoint. So are we following up till this point? Just get the feedback. Okay, yes. Are we following up to this point? I need a response. Okay, yes. All right. Okay, so use recommended origin settings. Yes. So we click next. Now we have a WAF, a web application firewall. Um, for this case, we are going to say do not. Our application is not that complex, so we don't need the WAF. Besides, a WAF is also a paid service, so you want to be careful here. So say do not enable security protections. Next. Okay, so it's giving us a summary. We have our S3 website endpoints. Okay, okay, let's create distribution. So this is going to take a while because it's deploying this to the internet, to the World Wide Web. So it's going to take a while. So once this is done, our website we should be able to access our website using um, the distribution domain name, which is what we have here. So while it's loading, let's just go through some of the features of CloudFront. So from the security perspective, we talked about WAF, which we do not need for our case. There's also CloudFront geographic restriction. I think someone asked this question. You can see that it's possible to restrict, um, it's possible to restrict based on countries, you can see. So it's very much possible to do that. So a use case might be if your primary audience are in Nigeria, right? You may just want to restrict this to Nigeria. Okay. There might be other use cases, maybe yeah. So let's look at origin. For our origin, we specified our S3 endpoint, which is what we have here. Now you can see we also have the options of creating origin groups. It's an advanced feature, right, which we are not going to look at now, but you have that. You also have, sorry, you also have the option of creating another origin, right? So using one distribution, we can have multiple origins, right? That is very much possible. So, but for this demonstration, we'll just stick with one origin. We also have behaviors. So you remember I talked about CloudFront. So you can actually create different behaviors. So here, for example, we see redirect HTTP to HTTPS. So what that means is that if we attempt to access our site on HTTP, we'll get the HTTPS version of it. You can restrict the HTTP methods that you can call on this. There are lots of things you can do with caching and intercepting of request and response. That's a bit advanced again. We don't look at that, but these are just the possibilities. We also have error page. So if a user asks for a content that does not exist, we can create a custom error page that that user would see. Then we have invalidation, right? So if we want this content to be deleted from CloudFront cache, maybe the content on on our S3 bucket has changed, and we want CloudFront to delete what it has stored prior to the change, we can just create an invalidation, and we can. I think we should do this. Maybe I think we should try out this invalidation so that you can see for yourself. And of course, we have login. There were lots of questions around login, so you can see you can create different login options for our CloudFront. Okay, so let's go back. This is the distribution we created. Let's see if it has deployed. Was the status? Is it still loading? Let's take this and try opening. Okay, it has deployed. So voila, we now have HTTPS on our site. Right, as you can see, we have HTTPS here. So CloudFront has added caching and has also added HTTPS to our site. Sorry, I think I've messed up the screen. Let's see. All right. So we have achieved our intended purpose. So I don't know if anyone has a question based on what we've done so far. Any question, any comments? So for those of us who are following, have we been able to do this? Is it working? Someone is asking why using CloudFront does static content get cached globally or within AWS region? Within AWS region. Okay, the specific internals of AWS caching, I don't know. I think that is their proprietary information. But what we know is that when you cache content, it should be readily available to users. So what that means is that I'm in Nigeria. If I'm accessing a content, this content has been cached on CloudFront. Um, AWS availability zone closest to me should be the one serving me that content, not the one in US or the one in Europe or the one in Japan. So that's what we know about that. So the closest availability zone or should serve me that content. Okay, he said working perfectly. I like that word perfectly. Okay, so there's immense possibility with AWS. Just to give you a look, this is my personal site. It's something I'm proud of because when I did this, I think 2 years ago or so, I didn't know it was possible. So this is my personal site. Don't mind the fact it hasn't been updated for almost a year now. So you can see that this is actually on AWS S3 buckets, right, with a cloud front in front of it, right? And these are content. So you may ask, oh, how do you publish new content on this site? So for this site, I use CI/CD pipeline, right? So okay, firstly, before CI/CD pipeline, I use a static site generator called Jekyll. If you look down here, you see something called Jekyll. So I use a static site generator. Then once I'm done with that, I use a CI/CD pipeline to update content on that site. So someone was asking about CI/CD. So it's very much possible for you to do that. It's very much possible to get that done. Okay, give me 1 second, please. Okay, so I think um okay, so my personal site, I was showing it on a different browser. Wow. Okay. I think that's kind of pulled out from this tab. So this is what I was talking about. Apologies for that, for those that are following. So this is what I was talking about. This is my personal site or blog. It is hosted on basically everything I've described to you. That's what's got me this. The only difference is that there's a CI/CD pipeline integration to update the sites, right? So this is it. So just to show you, if I come here and look at the certificates, you see that certificate is served. Sorry, you see that the certificate is served from AWS. You can see it's AWS. So this is fronted by CloudFront. The contents are on S3 buckets. Oh, I even have it here. So you can come here and look at it. So if we come to my S3 bucket, this is the website here. This is it. So this is the website basically. So everything you're seeing here, this is it, right? So I have, okay, I think I can also demonstrate what I'm saying. So I have some, if you come to properties, um, if you go down to event notification, you can see I have an event notification here. So basically, when I make um, a put action on my S3 bucket, put action means I upload a new content. So when I make a put action, you can see it here, event type put. When I make a put action on my S3, an event notification is triggered, and that event notification calls a Lambda function, and that Lambda function invalidates the cache content, right? That's what I was trying to explain before. So invalidates the cache content. So immediately I upload new content to my site. The old content on CloudFront is deleted, right? So when users make new requests, um, the new content from S3 bucket is now pushed to CloudFront. So this is how this is achieved. Okay, so I think with this, we can now delete the resources we have created. We have created an S3 bucket, and we've also created a CloudFront distribution. Let me also state that with what we have now, you will not be charged anything, right? So if you leave what we have now for the next 1 year, AWS is not going to charge you anything, of course, because it's within the free tier, right? So this is not like your EC2 or any of this. So but let's go ahead and delete our content. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go back to S3 and want to delete the buckets we created. So we go to CSN static website hosting, which is here, and we click on delete to tell us it cannot delete because the bucket has content. So we'll have to empty the bucket first. That's just a safety feature. We'll have to empty the bucket first before we can delete it. So we put permanent delete. Okay, but before deleting, our CloudFront is live, right? So I think the proper thing to do would be to first disable the CloudFront, right? That will be the right way to go about it. So we should first disable the CloudFront, and then we can delete the bucket. So let's go to the CloudFront, which is what we have here. Let's see. Okay, we can select it here, and we can say disable or delete. Okay, to delete, you must first disable. Okay, so let's disable first. Again, if you want to have fun and you want to try these things out, it's very much possible, right? You have to remain within the free tier, right? And everything we have done so far is within AWS free tier, right? So as long as you don't have you know, 10,000, 100,000 of people visiting your site, you should be fine, right? Um, it's all within AWS free tier. Or you could just Google AWS S3 bucket free tier, and you can actually see you can see the metrics that are contained in the free tier, so you can be sure that you are safe. If you're very technical, you want to be 100% sure, you can do that. Okay, so this has been disabled, right? However, it's still not available for deletion, so we have to wait a bit. I think it's still loading. All right, so while this is going on, let me just, okay, this is still waiting. Okay, so I think we can delete the buckets now. So you can say permanently delete. So we are deleting the contents of the bucket we created. So it has deleted the content. So if we click on this now, you can see the bucket is empty. Our index file is gone. So let's just wait. Once the CloudFront deletes, I think it actually takes a while for that to happen. Okay, so while that is going on, let's see if there are any questions. How do I prevent direct access to the S3 buckets behind CloudFront? Behind CloudFront. Okay, so you have your bucket policies. So for our demonstration, we used a bucket policy that allowed any user to have access to, or to be able to read the contents of our bucket. So any user was able to read the contents of our bucket. However, we could be restrictive. Instead of saying any user, we can say only CloudFront should be able to read the content of our bucket. So if we use that much more stringent policy, it means that we are giving CloudFront, only CloudFront the permission to do that. So that way, only CloudFront will have access. No other service or no other user will have access to our buckets. So bucket policies are very important. In short, when it comes to security on AWS, um, um, bucket policies on S3 buckets, sorry, bucket policies play a very big role in doing that. Please, can the web app firewall do restriction based on IP address? Yes, of course. Of course, it can do that. Of course, it's a web application firewall. That's literally what it's meant for. So it can restrict based on IP address. It can also do even geo restriction we saw with CloudFront. It can use different rules or patterns, right? There's just a lot you can achieve with that. So that is very much possible. For your website, are you using Route 53 for your custom domain? Yes, I'm using Route 53 for my custom domain. So I have a hosted zone, and I'm using Route 53 for that. You say no charge. What about the CDK pipeline you use? Are you charged for it? No, I'm not charged for it. In terms of this particular metrics for that, I don't know. I don't know if maybe because I don't exceed it, that's why I'm not charged, but I'm not charged for it. The only thing I'm charged for is for my hosted zone on Route 53. That's my domain. That's the only thing I'm charged for, which is about $0.5 per month. So that's the only thing I'm charged for. Secondly, HTTPS attract additional fee unlike regular hosting where we pay for SSL. So HTTPS with CloudFront does not attract any fee, right? That's if you're using the CloudFront domain. You remember that is the CloudFront domain we are using, right? So it does not attract any additional fee for you. However, if you're going to use hosted zone with your domain, and it attracts that fee. So let's see, let's refresh this page, just be sure our CloudFront has finished. Okay, let's see. We select it. So we still can't delete it. So it actually takes a while for this thing to happen. So the last step would be to delete this CloudFront. So while that is going on, let's just delete the bucket since it's empty already. We have deleted our bucket contents. We are deleting our buckets. What is it saying? Okay, I think I'm deleting the wrong bucket. This is the bucket here. We'll say delete, and we delete our bucket. All right, so our bucket is gone. So the last step will be to wait for this distribution. And once it's done, you also delete it. Now, you're not going to be charged for it, so don't be scared, right? First of all, it's already disabled, so you will not be charged for it. So once it's done, you can delete it. So I think this is perfect, and I hope you're able to learn a lot. It's actually interesting what you can do with S3 buckets and AWS as a whole. So I encourage you just play around, take advantage. AWS also has lots of documentation, by the way. So you can take advantage of that and get going. All right, over to you, Okun.
Okay, okay. Wow, this was a lot. Okay, so thank you so much. So let's thank Mr. William for the awesome and interactive section. And I see how a lot of persons did follow along. Well, I hope you've listened very well, because once it's time for the tax, then we'll tell if you did listen. But thanks, Mr. William. It was quite the opportunity here to learn. This is a very critical part. You almost in anything you are doing, you definitely need to come across having to deploy your site using some CDN. I think in Azure they have front door and a couple of other technologies. So it's a beautiful thing to want to get acquainted with. All right, now let's get into um, the drum for the tax for today, and here we are. And before I get into this tax, I need to give some caution, and that caution is if at this stage you are scared of code, or you're at this stage you are scared of putting one and two together, or putting some HTML together, or putting some Python code together, then no, I would say in today's age with AI, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. As much as possible, I would advise, it's just a recommendation that you get um, acquainted with some coding language. But then that brings us to the task for today. And the task
Just
for today
just
is,
to just to
thank
interrupt you,
you.
sorry, Okun.
Thank you, sir.
The website, the index.html was generated with AI, Perplexity,
Oh, wow.
right? So everything there was generated with Perplexity. I just prompted it, the colors, everything. And so you can definitely take advantage of AI in generating your web content. Thank you.
Awesome. Also, you've heard it from my instructor already. So this week's task is simple. You are going to create your own website, as Mr. William has done. He has also dropped the link to his own website. You are also going to create your own website. It can be a resume site, it can be a portfolio site, it can be an about me page. All you simply need to do is go to ChatGPT, use Cursor, use Windsurf. Um, um, William used Perplexity. What other tool is out there? I think AWS released their own new tool recently. Use any of the AI tools out there, right? Create a simple HTML page with some CSS to style it and upload that file on your S3 bucket and enable CloudFront and static website hosting for it. It's that simple. I believe that tax is easy for everyone to understand. I don't know, Sir William, do you want to touch on the tax for like 30 for like a minute before to wrap things up?
Okay. I think the task is basically what we've achieved here already, right? So for if you're scared of HTML, CSS, like I said, just use AI. Tell AI what you want, right? Additionally, I can give you a scope. So if you look at the CloudFront website that we deployed, or the same one we deployed and shared, where you downloaded your index HTML from, there is number 2 and number 4, right? Those are actually blog sites. So you can take that, try to deploy it, try to make changes to it, and you should get going. So it's quite simple. I'll be honest with you. And AWS has made your life easy because you don't have to pay for it. I mean, think about a time where the only time you could deploy something was when you worked in an organization as a software developer or something. But today with AWS, you can literally do that. I'm saying this because it's my own testimony, right? The first time I ever deployed anything live in production was on AWS EC2. So you can definitely take advantage of this, play around, have fun. By the way, if you have any question, you can still reach out to me, or you can reach out to your boss, Ukun. And I'm sure between us and the other trainees, or sorry, the other trainers, we should be able to have answers to your question.
Oh yes, thank you so much. So we're going to continue with this section. Drop a message on Slack, drop a message on WhatsApp, or send an email, and then you would receive some response. You'll receive faster response on WhatsApp, and then maybe you'd also receive response on Discord too as well. Depending, email may take a while. All the same, thank you, Sir William, for this section. It's an opportunity, and it's well
Thank
appreciated.
you.
Okay, and everyone do have a beautiful day. See you at our next section. Take care.